From WBRN Radio, running on the Bostonred Network, and through various. This is the Numbers Man Show on the 8th of December 2019. We have probably over 630 episodes scattered around. There are more than that in various places around the web, what is euphemistically known as the net. We started this show on over at Blog Talk. There we were a radio station there, and we continue on. Over 10 years now we've done the show here, and as we move along in the field of macroeconomics, it's kind of an interesting situation. We've seen the psychology of the market, in other words, the hype of the market in the field of macroeconomics, much more, and also at the same time via the pages of Reuters and various others, CNBC, you can name those various financial channels out there. Economists are more and more, and analysts are more and more talking about what would be considered some spinning of the numbers. So thus we'll look at that as we move through with the latest jobs report and where jobs are in the U.S. And the big question is, how important is the number itself? I recall when we were working at an NGO called Jobs for Peace, we looked at this situation. Of course, at that time, big data was not accessible on the internet because there was no internet to access. Period. Thus, we had to cobble together the numbers from Bureau of Statistics and various the Labor Department, various others, and whatever other types of information we could get around the country to look at it. We did not have the globalized element that we have today, which is a different specimen. But if we go back historically, looking at the influence and impact of the global economy and how corporations or how capitalists in general have to access those markets. Marx wrote extensively about that. And a good example is the what is known as the Internet and Internet type companies, i.e. Facebook, Alphabet, etc., and it would go even to manufacturers like Intel, particularly Intel, Micron, and various others, that they have to go outside of North America to sustain their profitability. And the reasoning for this is, particularly when you start talking about information technology, you're talking about a global situation that most of the internet, in fact, the majority of internet users are now outside of North America, and that has been the case for several years. And if you look at, say, China, for instance, with 1.4 billion people there and millions of people accessing the internet in China, that the market obviously would be much larger than all of North America. And then you add up India, etc., and that market has increasingly, or is, I should say, mobile devices, smartphones, etc., pads, you name it, they are there. And they have Facebook, and they have the applications out there where millions and millions of people are accessing these applications. Facebook alone has over 1 billion users at any given time, and we have to throw Twitter in here also. Incidentally, we are on Twitter. But these are some of the things that face this economy. So when you give a number, 3.5, 3.6, 3.7 as the rate of redundancies or the unemployment rate, you are giving a number. In fact, if you look at what they used to call the real number, we were always interested in this, at what's called U6. U6 now stands at, cheat sheet here, at 6.9. It was 7. That is the so-called real number. One understands that when you look at jobs numbers, they only count people that are in the system primarily. And we'll get to a little bit of that. But if you have that historic count out there, now even the Federal Reserve uses ADP. You can look at their numbers. This is based upon payrolls that they have out and other evidence, the Conference Board, etc. We'll have some PCIs from the ISH Market Corporation in London, and look at the EU and some other places where we can look around. This is not an isolated situation, period. But we will try to, as I say, move some of the brush away and try to get to the actual target on this cast. We'll start with Reuters here, and we'll just introduce the U.S. Jobs numbers from them. And this was on the, let's see, when was this? The 6th of February, 6th of February, 6th of December. Anyway, U.S. job growth increased the most in 10 months in November. That would be this year. In healthcare, industry boosting hiring production workers. Of course, GM was a strike, and there were 40,000 plus workers out in the strike. And you have to also add in there the ecosystem. In other words, people that were involved in this so-called supply chain, another 10 or more thousand people there. So we had over 50,000 people that returned to the economy. So that boosted the number itself. So we take that out. Let's go on with this. The unemployment rate ticked down to its lowest level in a half century. Doesn't materially matter there, because when you go back to half century, 50 years before, you were looking at a totally different economy. Numbers suggest consumers will keep the longest economic expansion in history, now in its 11th year, chugging along the next year when the Americans will decide an election, a presidential election. That is pure speculative. The report added to other fairly upbeat, and notice the word term fairly upbeat data on trade deficit, housing, orders for big ticket items, what we call doable goods. And this article brings the Fed into that. Borrowing costs is low, but lowering the rate of interest does not benefit the banks. Now, in this article, they go back starting in July of 2008, reducing the central bank cut rate 3 times this year. They won't cut it in December, starting in July, when it reduced borrowing costs for the first time since 2008. 2008 was the beginning of the Depression. The central bank policymakers are expected to highlight the economy's resilience when they meet on the 10th. That'll be this week. At the same time, there's an election in the EU. This is a strong report with solid rise in payrolls, another drop in the unemployment rate, and decent growth in hourly earnings. Chris Lowe, he's an economist at FHN Financial in New York. The Fed sees this as a clear validation of its decision to stop cutting rates. Well, we at this mic felt that he should have never started cutting rates. Anyway, 266,000 jobs were created, according to our calculus here. With the workers coming back, you roughly have 220,000, a little less than that, at the most, jobs are created. And the gains of 60,000 healthcare workers, the most since March. And this was a system that was supposed to, according to various prognostications by politicians, but by economists, that with the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, that would kill healthcare. Healthcare is actually expanded, period. And these 43,000 jobs that manufacturing recuperated was the GM strike. But colder than normal temperatures, of course, that does curb Construction sites helped to sink. Of course, mining payrolls were already sunk. The largest increase in payroll since January pushed the growth well above its monthly average of 180,000. That's according to economists. Had forecast payrolls rising by 180,000 in November. That's the Reuters poll. The economy created 41,000 more jobs in September and October than previous estimate. That's not unusual there. And the return here now of 46,000 GM people exceeded the 200,000 jobs last month. The robust payroll gain suggested that the trade war with China, which has plunged manufacturing into recession, has yet spilled on the broader economy. Well, broader economy is a little different situation there. And more tariffs coming in, but the tariffs themselves have had really minimal effect on the overall economy. Now, in many instances, manufacturers in the U.S. have just taken the hit, so to speak, and not passed it on to consumers, period. And now, as far as the dollar strengthening there against a basket of currencies, snapping a 5-day losing streak, U.S. Treasury prices fell. Stock rallied. Well, that's been a roller coaster on the exchange, an up and down situation here. Job openings are near a 1.5 or 1.5 year low. Small business hiring intentions have softened relative to 2018. That's the excuse me. That's the Institute for Supply Chain Management survey of factory employment, contrasting 4 months, straight months. That's recession in manufacturing. That has been out there, and a lot of businesses are listing jobs with no intentions of hiring. Well, this morning's reading is a definite improvement. It does little to explain waning moments over the past 10 months. That is from the chief economist at Esta in Chicago, Larry Pizzuza. It remains to be seen if such strength signals a turning point to more robust hiring patterns. Well, that is a situation there. There's no doubt about that. The labor market remains resilient, and hiring has slowed from monthly gains of 223,000 because of the ebbs of demand and shortage of workers. And on the 12-month, the government has said it could cut job growth for 12 months, March of 2019, by 500,000 jobs. And this revision next September, no doubt about next February. Job creation is well over roughly 100,000 per month needed to keep up with the growth in the working population. The rate of fell 1/10, that is 3.5, and you can't compare that with 1969 for the simple reason population was lower and you had a totally different economy, period. And they do actually in this article add the rate I gave you, a broader measure, people who want to work but gave up searching because they couldn't find a full-time employment, fell to the 6.9 from 7%. That's called U6, a rate there. And looking for one, dipped to 63.2 in November from 63.3 in October. That's the labor force participation rate. Still a fairly high participation rate out there, but a lot of people are working a number of jobs. The average hourly earnings at 7 cents are 2/10 after increasing 4/10 in October. 12-month running average is 3.1 there after advancing 3.2 in October, which is held back by a concentration of low-paying industries, and that has been one of the big problems, that many of these jobs, so-called jobs created, are relatively low-paying jobs, under $15 an hour. and we'll get into this. So we'll just fly away here, and we'll go to CNBC. We kind of gave an overview here. Sometimes we give the overview after we've looked at other things. We don't have our numbers here, but the Dow did surge more than 300 points on blockbuster job report. So on Friday, it was up by 300 points, period. And out west, while we are just looking at CNBC here, the Pacific Gas and Electric said it reached $13.5 billion wildfire settlement out there, period. And the Trump administration's called on the World Bank not to lend money to China. Well, that's a position for the World Bank to decide there if they will or they will not. Been a lot of contention out here. And I was looking just here at something, a little headline here from Oracle: net debt and a $75 billion argument that stock buybacks can't go too far. There's no doubt about that. And that's what basically happened in the period of the tax cut. But most of this money it's usually always argue you give a tax cut and it'll trickle down. Well, it didn't trickle down, period. It trickled but not down. So that's always a big situation. Let's go to conference board here. This data we didn't have last week for you, so we'll put this out. The conference board, of course, has been around a very, very long time. It reflects prevailing business conditions, likely developments for the months ahead, it says here, and this is on the 26th of November, but it still has relevancy. Confidence level still remains high and should support solid holiday spending. In fact, from the figures that are out, it did. Cyber Monday, Black Friday not so much anymore, but Cyber Monday up around 19%. The conference board confidence index decreased in November following a slight decline in October. The index now stands at 125.5, and in 1985 equals 100, down from 126.1 in October. The present situation index, based on consumers' assessment of current business and labor conditions, decreased from 173.5 to 166.9. The expectation index, based on consumers' short-term outlook for income, business, and labor market conditions, increased from 95.5 last month to 97.9. Consumer confidence declined the fourth consecutive month, driven by a softening in consumer assessment of current business and employment conditions. That is from Linda Franco, Senior Director of Economic Indicators at the Conference Board. Decline in present situation index suggests that economic growth in Q4, the final quarter of 2019, will remain weak. However, consumers' short-term expectations improve modestly, and growth in early 2020 is likely to remain at around 2%. And we've heard the term 2% banted around, and 2.1, 2.2% as more than likely what will happen. However, overall confidence levels are still high and should support solid spending during the holidays. In fact, it did. I haven't got a figure yet on how consumers paid for this. Consumers' appraisal of current day conditions was less favorable in November. The percentage of consumers claiming business conditions are good rose slightly from 39.7% to 40.2%, but those claiming business conditions are bad also increased from 11% to 13.8%. Consumers' assessment of the job market was less favorable than last month. Those saying jobs are plentiful decreased from 47.7% to 44.8%, while those claiming jobs are hard to get increased from 11.6% to 12.7%. Consumers were modestly more optimistic about the short term. the percentage of consumers expecting business conditions will improve over the next 6 months increased slightly from 18.7 to 17.2, while those expecting business conditions will worsen slightly, increased from 11.5 to 12.1. Consumers' outlook for the labor market was mixed. The proportion expecting more jobs in the months ahead decreased from 16.9 to 15.7, but those expecting fewer jobs also decreased from 18% to 13.2. Regarding the short-term income prospects, the percentage of consumers expecting improvement edged up 21.4 from 21.8, that's 4/10 there, while those expecting a decrease declined from 6.9 to 6.2. Thus, this is their index here that is sent out. Conference Board, of course, is an NGO. It's a not-for-profit. It was founded in 1916. It's been around over 100 years, a very long time, based there in New York. And they now use Nielsen Holdings. Now, Nielsen, the people that used to put the box atop one television set, they watch consumer watch and buying. Nielsen Watch segments provide media and advertising clients what they now call total audience measurement services for all devices on which content, video, audio, and text is consumed. The buying segment offers consumers, packaged good manufacturers, retail industry, the only global view of retail performance measurement by integrating information from its watch and buy segment and other data sources. And that's the key there. The Fed's doing also provide its clients with analytics that help performance. Is an S&P 500 companies operating in over 100 countries. Anyway, the next release here will be on last day of December, December 31st. So we'll roll along here. I get the right point of pointing here. And we'll get another tech here on the job. And this is from CNBC. Now, a little different here. You get a little different tech. Non-farm payrolls, of course, surged by 266,000. Better than the expected 187,000 expected by economists polled by Dow Jones. The unemployment rate, of course, ticked down 3.5. This is their takeaways here. The end of the strike by GM workers employed in motor vehicles and parts by 41,000, part of an overall 54,000 gain in manufacturing. And again, this is the average hourly earned earnings rose 3.1 from a year ago, slightly above the 3% expected by economists. So it's a tempo point there. These totals easily beat the consensus. Again, that was 187,000. Consensus are always there, but again, that is being safe. You can generally expect 200,000 plus in holiday seasons, jobs being created. Roughly, we see it as about 220,000. Because of the additional workers by, say, the Amazons of the world and various retailers, particularly the online retailers, the Targets, the Amazons, the Best Buys, they add people. Brick and mortar is a totally different situation. So thus, when we look at brick and mortar, they lost a lot of people, and we'll look at that in a minute here. And as far as calling them very strong numbers, they're not that strong. They were not, because that Grobrow was the best since January. Is at 312,000, well clear of the November 2018's total of 196. Now, the length of the GM strike there, and one of the things we don't have here is the effects on local businesses now that remained open when that many workers were out, places like Flint, Michigan, and various other places there. Vehicle parts sector had fallen by 42,000 in October, and overall 54,000 gain in manufacturing. And my subtraction there, let's see, what about 41, 10,000, a little over 10,000, about 13,000 there. And we won't go over some of these, but leisure and hospitality, that goes up and down. Professional business services, of course, professional business services have been rising all along. 31,000. There, two sectors respectively were up to 219,000, 278,000. That's over the past 12 months. Average gain was 3.1 from last year, while the average work week at 34.4. Of course, the economists were looking, and they're all putting this in, this magical 3.9. That's the U6 data, and some had been revised up. This is the September estimate, went up by 13,000 to 193,000. The initial count increased in October, increased by 28,000. You can see these kind of volatile here. And changes added 41,000 and brought average monthly total to 180,000 compared with 223,000 in 2018. You can see the decrease. And as far as blowout numbers, no. Another person here in a note. This is head of global marketing for Citizens Bank. This is Tom Bedican. Anyway, the unemployment rate is 50-year low, and this is pretty much echoed by a lot of these people. Business owners may be getting more cautious due to trade and political uncertainty, and growth may be slowing, but consumers keep spending. Well, punch bowl is still full. Well, we'll see how quick. Now, this is the ADP report here. Some of the November's count might disappoint after ADP reported on Wednesday that private payrolls rose just 67,000. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually put the number at 254,000, with the remaining 12,000 jobs created at the governmental level. Now, ADP, that is a private employment role, that is their estimate. The Federal Reserve uses that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics put the number at 254,000 and 12,000 at the government level. Today's report, more than any other report in recent months, squashed any lingering concerns about an immediate recession in the U.S. That is from the head of the Conference Board, Labor Market Institute, Lebanon. Anyway, employment growth also showed no sign of slowing further, despite the historic low numbers. Let's go and do the numbers and cap this off. Then we'll go. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Labor. The employment situation rose by 266,000, and the unemployment rate fell to 3.5. This news release presents statistics from two monthly surveys. The household survey measures force status, including unemployment by demographic characteristics. The establishment survey measures non-farm employment, hours, and earnings by industry. And this is major work groups. We hadn't heard this. The rate of unemployment are redundancies for adult men, 3.2, adult women, 3.2, also teenagers at 12%, for Europeans at 3.2, for African Americans falling again at 5.5, Asians at 2.6, Latinos at 4.2, little change and no change in November. Long-term unemployment, those jobless for a half year, 27 weeks or more, at 1.2 million, was essentially unchanged there, accounting for 20.8% of the unemployed. The labor force participation rate was little changed at 63.2 in November, and the employment population ratio at 61% for the third consecutive month. Hasn't changed. The number of persons employed for part-time for economic reasons at 4.3 million, a little change in November. In November, there were 1.2 million persons marginally attached to the labor force, down by 432,000 from a year earlier. These individuals were not in the labor force and wanted or were available for work. They were not counted as unemployed because they had not searched for work. Amongst the marginally attached, there were 325,000 discouraged workers in November, down by 128,000 from a year earlier. Discouraged workers are persons not currently looking for work because they believe there are no jobs there. The remainder 921,000 marginally attached in November did not search for work for reasons such as attending school, etc. Now, the establishment survey data, the unemployment rose by 266,000. Job growth was average 180,000. That's 2019 compared with gains of 223,018. November, notable job gains occurred in healthcare and professional technical services. Employment also increased in manufacturing. We need to return there. In November, healthcare added 45,000 jobs, following little employment change in October. 12. November job gains occurred in ambulatory healthcare services, 34,000. In medical centers, 10,000. Healthcare added 414,000 jobs over last year, 12 months. Employment in professional technical services increased by 31,000 in November and by 278,000 this year, 12 months. Or 12-month period. Manufacturing rose by 58,000 in November, following a decline of 43,000 the prior month, with manufacturing employment in motor vehicles and parts were up by 41,000 with the return of the GM workers. Employment in leisure and hospitality continued to trend up 45,000. The industries added 219,000 jobs over a 4-month period. It's quite a few. Employment in transportation and warehousing continued upward trend in November, 16,000. Within the industry, job growth occurred in warehousing and storage, 8,000, and in couriers and messengers, 5,000. Financial activity employment also continued to trend up, 13,000 there, with gains of 7,000. Credit intermediation and related service financial activities added 116,000 jobs over 12 months. Mining lost jobs, 7,000 there, largely in supporting activities, 1,000 there. Mining employment is down 19,000 since its peak in May. In retail was unchanged at 2,000. With the industry, employment rose in general merchandise and stores, 22,000. Motor vehicles and parts dealers, 8,000, while clothing and clothing accessories lost a negative 18,000 jobs. Employment in other major industries, construction, wholesale, information, and government, little changed. The average hourly rose 7 cents, $28.29 over 12 months. The average hourly earning has increased by 3.1% in November. Average hour earning of private sector production and non-production rose 7 cents, $23.83. The average work week for all workers was 34.4 hours. And manufacturing average work week increased 3/10 to 40 hours and 5/10. Overtime decreased by 1/10. Change in total non-farm employment. September was revised up by 13,000. 193,000. Changes in October was revised up by 28,000 from 128,000 to 156,000 there. Monthly revision resulted from additional reports received from business and government agencies since the last publication. And the next release will be on the 10th. Upcoming changes, a situation on February 7th, 2020. Series of displays in some of their tables. Persons marginally attached to the labor force discouraged workers will be replaced with a new seasonally adjusted series. A new seasonally adjusted series will be available in the online database back to 1994, not seasonally adjusted data for people marginally attached. And to the labor force, all discouraged workers will continue to be published. Persons marginally attached to the labor force discouraged workers are inputted into free alternative measurements of labor underutilization. We've moved for that, therefore, in the publication of the employment situation on January 2020, data from U4, U5, and U6 will reflect in a new season-adjusted series. Beginning with data in 2020, occupational estimates in A13 will reflect the introduction of the 2018 census occupation categories into the household survey. This is derived from the 2018 standard occupational classification system, SOC. In addition, and these are some tables here, at the beginning of, again, 2020, estimates of married persons will include those in opposite sex and same-sex marriages. So it reflects the societal changes as a whole here. Let me just give you a little bit here. Won't spend a lot of time. We'll move it up. We've done the labor force the civilian labor force in November 2018 was 162,821,000. In September, it was 164,034,000. And in October, it was 163,364,000. And it was in October, and in November, it was 164,404,000. So the ratio, last year in November, was 60.6. In November, it's 61. That's the labor force participation rate. And if we look at the unemployment rate, last year was 3.7. It's 3.5 in September 2019. 3.6 in October, went up 1/10, 3.5 now. And if we look at a little, the unemployment rate, 16 and over with 3.7, doesn't really say very much there. We'll look at teenagers here. Last year, it was November, it was 12%, then 12.5, and now it's back to 12%. For Europeans, 3.4 last year, 3.2, 3.2. For African Americans, last year in November was 6 point and 5.5, 5.4, and now back to 5.5. So 0.5% decrease there. For Latinos, it was 4.4 last year in November, and then 3.9 and 4.1, and now it's 4.2. For people that did not escape high school, it was 5.7 last year, and now it's 5.3, still fairly high. Those at some college, 3.1, and now it's 2.9. And for people that have degrees, 2.2, and now 0.2%. Duration of unemployment, less than 5 weeks, 2,127,000, and now it's 2 million, not 20. Down a little bit there. 27 weeks over, that is over a little over half. 1,259,000 last year, and now it's 1,224,000. And changes in thousands. Doable goods was at 6, and 6/10. That was last. It was a negative. Wait a minute, you just meant doable goods was at 16. It was -1 in September this year, and there we go. And 44. Anyway, it doesn't really tell you very much at all there. Doable goods, we just did. Non-doable goods, it was at 11, and at 3 in September, and now it is month change in thousands. Okay. Anyway, if we go down to health and education services, it was healthcare and social assistance, 36.6 last year. He's now at 62.2. Leisure was at 1. Now it's at 9 million there. So The average week is at 34.4. It's still at 34.4 a year later. It hasn't really changed at all. It was $27.43 last year, 29 cents. It has been that way for a little while here. Bring out, and that ends that particular one here. Let's go to some PCIs. So this is the general economy, how the jobs are created at the end of the year here. Now, this is the ISH market European sector PMI. Slow decline in autos, outputs, and slowest, I should say. And the key finds, weak fall in new orders at European auto firms since October 2018. Forward-looking ratio of new orders in stocks and finished goods continues to improve. Strong growth in banking, technology, and other financials. The European sector PMI are compiled with responses from over 8,000 private sector companies in 11 countries. The automobile and auto parts sector remains in a downturn in November with its output index 17 of the 19 sectors. That said, the rate of contraction signal was slowest for the year. Overall decline in new orders easing further, and inventory and finished goods continuing to fall sharply. The ratio of the two indicators rose again, pointing to further recovery level. Less positive employment in the sector. Their sector here, we see some growth in banks, software and services, other financials, beverages and food, tourists and recreation, and then industrial service goes down. And the ones in the red, real estate, household, personal use, product, construction, engineering, healthcare services, chemicals, industrial goods, forestry and paper products, automobiles, and this is basically where they stood. Mining, roughly there at 50. So in other words, not where you would want to be there. Let's move on here to another PCI. We don't have many, but we did have a few. Last week we had many. Now this is the U.S. sector PMI. Consumer goods production expand at fast pace since May. Consumer financial services remain the best performance sectors. Technology gained momentum in November. Industry and healthcare recorded the slowest rise in output levels. Consumer goods producers experienced the fastest expansion in 7 broad categories monitored by the PMI in November. Output volumes expanded at the strongest pace for 1.5 years, with widely outperforming consumer goods in comparison. Financial sector retains its pace near the top performance table in November. A faster rate of growth was also recorded amongst technology firms during the last survey period, which means the sector continues to recover from the soft patch seen in the middle of the year 2019. Strong household spending was also another expansion of business activity amongst consumer services. There are signals that business investment remains subdued in the latest survey period, with basic materials and industries recorded the slowest rate there. That said, the weakest performance category was healthcare services. This sector returned to growth in November, following a brief decline in October. Now, this is from Tim Moore. He's Associate Director at IHS Markit. The latest U.S. sector PMI data provides a clear signal that greater household spending was the main driver behind gradual recovery in the national PMI surveys during November. Improved consumer demand more than offset the drag on economic growth from subdued business investment. That just basically means businesses have less confidence in the future. And we talked about that last week, the divide between consumers and businesses in inversion index. Anyway, consumer goods producers reported the fastest output expansion for 18 months in November. The warm glow from rising household demand also helped to boost financial services, the tech sector, and consumer service providers in the final quarter, Q4. In contrast, overall activity in industrial categories rose at a modest pace, reflecting a weak contribution from production of capital goods and soft demand for commercial services. And something we keep on the radar here, and this is our final one here, collection here. This is the global auto sector shows signs of recovery in November. This is the first rise since September 2018. Outbound broad consumer good sector expands the fastest rate since June of 2018. Strong growth in banking activity in nearly 3 years. The global PCI compiled from responses from over 27,000 companies in 20 companies, in 40 different countries. November's data provides signal of recovery in the global auto and auto parts sector. The trend in new orders stabilized while jobs were cut only fractionally. The manufacturing PCI for the sector rose to an 11-month high of 49.9, remaining below, of course, the magical 50% mark. The rise in auto production helped drive consumer goods output growth to an 17-month high, in November. The other two components, as broad sector, beverage and food, household, personal goods, registered the fastest increase in 8 and 17 months, respectively. Banks rose over the top of the global sector, ranking in November with the fastest expansion in business activity since December of 2016. In contrast, insurance posted the slowest growth since September 2016. Only 4 sectors recorded a lower output growth: mining and metals and mining, forest and paper products remained rooted to the bottom rankings, while healthcare services slipped back into contraction. Industrial goods saw a near stabilization in out. Gave no summary here. Anyway, banks on the top, then food, beverages, telecommunications services, pharmaceuticals, and biotechnology is up there. Household personal use there, real estate next, and tourism, other financial services, and then software services. This is globally now. And media, and then chemicals, industrial services, the auto parts business, insurance, transportation way down there. Technological equipment fall in there. Household goods were in the red, so were healthcare services. Now this is on a worldwide basis with forest and paper products and mining. So basically, where consumer, global consumer out, well, this is it. They gave no summary here, but basically what we deduced from this, the automobile sector is in a little bit better shape. Of course, in Europe there's some consolidations. There is the merger there of Renault and the Fiat organization, talking about I think a merger there, Fiat. Of course, there's the French government involved in that particular situation. So supposedly in 2020, we'll see more of a consolidation of those sectors, of those industries, I should say, the automobile sector. What 2020 has in store for automobiles, very interesting to see. There were a lot of incentives for automobile sector. But now with the GM workers are back, they have a 3-year contract. Contracts at Chrysler and at Ford also have been settled, and there will be more investment in the U.S. in these in plants, and of course plants will be more mechanized. There's no doubt about that. And consolidations there. The automobile sector is not what it used to be. So when you look to manufacturing, you see a leaner manufacturing, a more automated or robotized, I hope that's a word, manufacturing there. And if you look to the online people like Amazon there and these other retailers, you see that supply chain, much more automated than ever before. In other words, how many widgets are in the factory at any particular time, they can guess. And sometimes, obviously, they don't have enough widgets, but generally speaking, they do. So you don't see a lot of sales there. Now, incentives during the holiday period, yes, there were some, but from our little anecdotal gazing there were not as many as in previous years. I was talking to a gentleman last night at the market, was going to buy a new TV set type from the manufacturer Samsung. I can mention them. And the price, of course, this is one with the latest bells and whistles in it. It was a little under $500. I can recall when we had the flat panels. I forget even what they were called now, but anyway, they were up there $3,000 and $4,000, and you can see where these, and you hung them on the wall there, and you had to, etc. So you won't see that anymore. But when we went to LCD, that changed things, and the prices of LCD went down, which means depending on the bells and whistles, this fellow could get that set for under $300 a US, and that is up in the 55-inch category. Of course, now you can go much there. And I didn't check to see the standing in line types, what they could get a similar type of a television, probably for under $300 there. So, in other words, those incentives out there. But when you look at these special consumer incentives, we look to the types of not only doable goods, but the types of things that consumers will normally use in a 12-month span. And those things, 10-20% knock. And noticing at the market, as far as foods are concerned, volatile food there, many of the prices have inched up 20 or 30 or 40 cents, 50 cents in some instances so that is up. And I don't know, pork and those kinds of things were up some. There's an oversupply of pork, at least in the U.S. They hope to furnish some of the other markets like China, who's hit by the swine operation. So those things have changed, but that has not turned. Where will the tariffs go? Well, the tariffs eventually will be situated there. And also with the WCO, evidently the settlement operation there, they have to have so many people on the board. The U.S. didn't supply anymore, so it is now put, as they say, on the shelf, a sports term. So the history of WTO, I remember when we marched against it out in Seattle. And then as we reflected on it, I said, well, this capitalist institution will at least serve a purpose where the capitalists can all meet together and decide on settlements. Well, that did not happen now. So you're more into this tariff, threat of tariff situation. And the big question is, and I'll have to do some research on this, I see some papers out here, not only the long-term effects of tariffs, but if a tariff, and we'll say a 5% or, well, the 10% tariff, becomes a normalized situation, then the markets and pricing mechanisms normalize to it. And that is what has happened with some of these tariffs that the Trump administration put out there, that the costs of doing business has normalized. And in China, we saw their export drop over 1%. So they're not exporting as much. Will China eventually adjust to this? The answer there is yes, they will. And that's a situation now, another 25% coming on. But the takeaway here is no matter what comes on, and if it stays there for a considerable amount of time, markets normalize to it, and China will normalize to theirs. They will have less exports. But how does this affect Europe? Brexit, an election in the UK coming up. And what will happen after Election Day? Will they leave with the Brexit? And how that will affect jobs and growth in the United Kingdom. It will affect it, no doubt about that, and it will be detrimental. And will the USA and the UK have a trade agreement? It's a question mark there. Would it include what's popped into the campaign, the National Healthcare Service? Very well could. And that could in turn affect healthcare, particularly pharmaceuticals in the UK. So we see all those on the horizon. So 2020 is going to have a lot of headwinds going, and the whole idea of an economy expanding for 10 straight years doesn't happen on a normal industrial capitalism. This economy has had ebbs and flows. And of course, if you look at the market, up and down, what will OPEC do? Minimally, Brent crude is under $60 a barrel, and wherever the rigs stand out in the what used to be called the old oil patch, well, we don't know. There are less rigs there now than before. There are workers laid off in Texas. How much of that is related to demand? They will continue to be laid off. And automation of production. As a lady would explain to me in Nebraska, there were many, many workers there in her town of Steele, Nebraska, where once the pipeline was completed, it was down to less than 10. So we see a lot of that, and this is a whole North Dakota, South Dakota miracle. They've seen it before. People were coming in, all those people have left. What happens to that economy? This is the same question. We'll look at this in depth. What happened to the economies, the periods that the GM workers were out? The local diners, did the employment stay at the same? Obviously, we're doing less business for the longest strike they've had since the 80s or the 70s. Anyway, so again, and then you had what was it? Teacher strike out in Chicago. They have returned. In many of these strikes, workers get multi-year. They always get multi-year deals, usually 3-year contracts. So they will go in past 2020 and pass our 2020 election. So we look at all these factors and see where we are going, and how much consumers used so-called plastic or credit leverage for the buying season. Now, it does make sense if a consumer saw an item they'd use in the next 12 months, the next holiday bribery season, they would buy something. And evidently they bought some. I don't know what the average was. The average last year was about $300 per person. This fellow with his TV set would have been a little over $300, but he's waiting to see if that particular set goes down in price, or perhaps if that model is discontinued, etc. Not in the field of macroeconomics. But the Fed will stay put. The dollar itself is relatively strong now, and some of the emerging economies are not doing badly. What will happen in the UK? That will affect Europe. And Germany is also slow. Germany, the big manufacturing behemoth of the EU. What happens in Germany? And then, of course, it goes to France. The demonstrators in the streets of France right now, the trade unions there over pensions, and they're on strike. So we have these variables mixed, and then we go to Italy and so forth and so on. The Spanish government, new socialist government coming in there. But around globally, we see a bunch of demonstrations, strikes, etc. out there for better economic conditions. And also in Madrid, we have the climate conference there. Greta Thunberg was there. Had to be escorted in by police, escorted out because of the sheer volume of people there. So young people around the world excited about that, but also central banks, the Federal Reserve, the IMF, etc., are now looking at the effects of climate change. The wildfires in Australia, burning of thousands of hectares there. I guess they call them acres in Australia. The wildfires out west in California, primarily in California, how that affects things. And the unusual cold climate conditions in earlier November, and another Arctic blast is, of course, coming into the Northeast, and we've seen that in upstate New York, etc. And will we we as in North America here, get another audition for that in January and perhaps in February? So those things up in the air. For those in business, make it a productive one. For the consumer, obviously, the eye is on the prize. This is, of course, Numbers Man, via WBRN Radio and the Bostonred Network in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth, and appreciate our partner, long-serving partner, Cranston Analytics, for the analytics, and the others that we have mentioned in the broadcast. Good day.